So again, I think that your guy is a football lover, and I think that not only is that going to help him learn the nuances of a playbook and learning how to play well against NFL defenses, that's going to inspire his teammates. If our guy is in the room doing this, why am I not doing this?
This is Birds 365 here on the JAKIB YouTube channel. Jeff Kerr in for Johnny Mac. Jody Mac here with you. And we've got a special guest joining us. Going to help us look ahead to the matchup coming up tomorrow night. That would be Eagles-Steelers. He covers the Steelers and their entire division for CBS. And he covered the inductions this past weekend in Canton. So we're going to talk a bunch of things with Bryan DeArdo, who joins us here on Birds 365. Brian, how are you, bud?
I'm doing great, guys. Thanks for having me on. How you doing this morning?
We're doing good, Brian. I'm glad I ain't wearing my Super Bowl hat today because it would have been a nice color coordination, nice match, but that's a little too much, I guess.
Now, which hat is that, Brian? I gotta take note there.
Oh, that's one of our free swag CBS Sports hats that we got this year since our network covered the Super Bowl. Very nice if you don't want to wear a biased hat, especially if I'm going to be joining a visiting podcast. So this is always a safe way to go whenever you're covering an NFL team getting on a show.
Generic Super Bowl hat. I like it. All right. No, we're going to pick your brain a little bit about the Steelers, who already had their first preseason game. They got to play in the Hall of Fame game. And yes, they are 1-0. Not that the wins and the loss mean anything in preseason, but I did watch with a tight eye the first half of that game. I've already admitted this here on Birds 365. I fell asleep in the second half. I'm sorry. Guys were playing whose names I didn't even know. I said, why am I watching this? And I kind of nodded out. But the Steelers did get one game under their belt. Were they happy with the results afterwards?
They were happy with the result. They haven't been happy with what's transpired in practice since. They've had some sloppy practices. They've had continuous injuries with the offensive line, some other positions. In the preseason game, going back to that real quick, they wanted to see a couple of things, how that starting offensive line will look. I'm using that with quotes because they don't have their entire nucleus back on the line. They wanted to see how the quarterbacks look behind Ben, and they wanted to see how Najee Harris looked. And defensively, it was about the punting battle between Jordan Berry and Harvin Presley, who they drafted late in the 7th round. And they also wanted to see how the cornerbacks look now that they lost their starting nickelback from the last couple of years. They checked just about all of the boxes. I don't think Mason Rudolph looked fantastic. He missed some easy throws. He did not direct any scoring drives. And Dwayne Haskins basically just played check off the entire night. So I don't think he did anything really to bolster his case to be the number 2 quarterback. Najee Harris looked good. Mike Tomlin said before the game, we just want to see positive gains. We just want to see if he can find the hole, get positive yards. He didn't have a run better than 6 yards, but he only had one negative run. That was really the fault of the offensive line. They gave up a lot of passing yards. So if you're an Eagle fan and you're interested to see how your quarterbacks look, especially in the slot, getting some quick completions out, the Steelers are your team. They allowed a lot of passes, as you watched the game. But they did get a lot of pressure on the quarterback. Alex Highsmith, who's going to be replacing Bud Dupree, looked fantastic. And they got some turnovers against Dallas. They forced some in the secondary. But they did give up a lot of passing yards. So I do think if you're an Eagles fan looking into tomorrow night's game, you should get a lot of passing yards. But scoring could be a challenge as the Steelers only allowed 3 points.
Are we going to be seeing Big Ben tomorrow night, or is he still on the fence?
He's done. He won't play tomorrow night. Tomlin said yesterday to expect pretty much the same thing that you saw on Thursday where Mason Rudolph came in, played most of the first half. Then you saw Dwayne Haskins finish the half and start the second half, and then you saw Joshua Dobbs, who actually played the best of Pittsburgh's quarterbacks and has had a really good training camp. You'll see him probably the entire fourth quarter, a little bit of the third quarter. You'll see Najee Harris for probably the entire first quarter, a little bit of the second. Then you'll get a lot of Anthony McFarland and stuff like that. No Juju Smith-Schuster, no Cameron Hayward, no Joe Hayden. They should not play Minka Fitzpatrick, but if they do, it would only be for a possession.
Since we're in the quarterback mode, I do want to ask you, I was a Mason Rudolph fan when he came out in the draft a couple of years ago. I thought he landed in the perfect place in Pittsburgh, could take his time developing behind Roethlisberger. Didn't think he was ready to step in right away, but I thought he had NFL game. Well, He got forced in because of Ben's injuries to play a little earlier than maybe the Steelers would have liked. And let's be frank about it, he wasn't good enough. And you're telling me he wasn't good enough last week in game number 1. They did commit to him as at least 4 game 1s preseason that he was the backup quarterback, which means he's going to start if Ben doesn't play. I've been disappointed in his progression in the NFL. I have my doubts now whether he is an NFL quarterback or not. What's gone wrong with him?
How much time do we have? No, I think, you made a lot of good points. You made a lot of good points. I think, so we watched his entire rookie season, right? And then he went 5-3 as the starter in 19. And that's what the Steelers GM always goes back on. It's all about, black and white. It's the tangibles. He had a winning record. Then he lost his only start last year. But when I look at Mason's body of work, I see potential. You saw the 45-yard completion to Chase Claypool during the Hall of Fame game. That was a great throw, a great decision. He had a couple of guys open, James Washington, I think, on a short crossing route, but Mason wanted the big play. And I give him credit over, Dwayne Haskins didn't try that. Josh Dobbs didn't try that. You have to show that you can make those big throws. Against the Browns last year in his only start, he really did a great job with his deep precision passing. You could argue that was the best deep ball passing game by any Steeler quarterback last season. But he has those brain farts, for lack of a better phrase, that does set him back. He hesitates still quite a bit. Doesn't always make the best decisions, and is hesitant, which I didn't think I would see that from Mason coming from Oklahoma State, where he threw the ball so much. I thought that he would be much more decisive with his decision-making. I do think a lot of this is reps. I think a lot of this is getting a chance to play through an entire season. And I'll be honest, this might get some criticism for Browns fans. I would argue he would be doing what Baker Mayfield's doing retrospectively if he had the amount of reps that Baker's had. I think if you guys go back a little bit, a lot of Steeler writers that have been covering the team for a long time would say his ceiling is Neil O'Donnell. His ceiling is a guy that can get you to a Super Bowl if the rest of your team is really strong, but he's not going to carry you to a championship. So I still like his potential. I think a lot of the tangible stuff is there, and he is a good leader. I don't know if he gets enough credit for that, but yeah, for whatever reason, he's inconsistent, and unfortunately that might not be fixed till he gets more reps.
James Washington only got a couple targets Thursday night, and of course, I want to be traded, and the Eagles, they kind of need a little bit of help at receiver. Basically, they need a veteran. I think James Washington would be a decent fit for them. I'm not sure if he's exactly what they need. Can you provide a little bit of a scouting report for us?
James Washington is streaky. He's very streaky. He had a really rough rookie season. He dropped the pass against Denver where he launched out for the ball when he didn't even have to jump. And that was the play that Ben Roethlisberger heavily criticized, which is one of the reasons why Ben does no longer do his weekly show, because he criticized teammates and got crap for it. But, James actually did really well in 19. He had I think he had 735 yards. And that was without Ben Roethlisberger. He's pretty much a deep threat. And he can make yards after the catch. I wouldn't say he's an explosive guy, but he's hard to tackle in the open field. His hands could be better. He had a drop in the Hall of Fame game. And not necessarily a speed demon, but he's small. He kind of has a Jalen Reagor kind of body, or Greg Ward, to kind of give you an example of Philadelphia guys you've had. So, again, I think for him, it's been a lack of opportunity. I think he did better with more game reps. He hasn't had many game reps. That's not necessarily a fault of his, because they have Juju, Claypool, Deontay Johnson, all those guys. Now, I don't think the Steelers are going to trade him, but if they would, they'd have to see something in these preseason games from their other young receivers, specifically Isaiah McCoy, Anthony Johnson, or a guy that had a big punt return in the Hall of Fame game, Matthew Sexton. So if you're an Eagles fan, you actually might need to be cheering for a fourth or fifth string Steeler receiver tomorrow night, and then that might lead to maybe a trade, because the Eagles wouldn't be a terrible trade partner, as the Steelers don't play them very much. They're in the NFC. So he's a good player, unfortunately inconsistent, and hasn't had a lot of reps in Pittsburgh.
Brian, you mentioned Minkah Fitzpatrick, who I thought was a stone-cold difference maker last year for the Steelers. Tremendous trade that they made the year prior to be able to pick him up and add to that defense. He's just a playmaker down in and down out. On most teams in the NFL, he'd be their best defensive player. That's not the case with the Steelers, because they've got T.J. Watt. And we know he's not playing. He didn't play in the preseason game last week. Don't expect him to play this week. Working on a contract extension and negotiation with the Steelers. They going to get this done before opening week of the regular season?
That's the hope. And I mean, TJ actually is not taking part in team drills. This is the funny thing with the sports media. I actually don't care. And I think it's a great thing TJ isn't participating because Melvin Ingram has done great with the Steelers' first team defense. So, and all the word from camp is that he looks like the Melvin Ingram that was a 3 consecutive Pro Bowler with the Chargers. So I like that Tomlin is allowing him to do this, but then there's some media members that are saying, no, he needs to be making TJ Watt out there and practicing and blah, blah, blah. So I think TJ is kind of making it a point that this needs to get done because he's not taking part in team practices. And there's some whispers he might sit out and pull a Le'Veon Bell and he'll play, but maybe the 2017 Le'Veon or he doesn't show up until week 1. Which, again, wouldn't be an issue. But as you guys know, the Steelers do not conduct business once the ball's kicked off week 1. I do think they're going to get it done. They have to get it done. The issue is he looking for money that's going to make him the highest paid edge rusher, or is he going to want maybe a less long-term deal but more guaranteed up front? The Steelers are starting to wake up to that. I think that was one of the issues with Le'Veon. They gave him all the money in the world for 5 years, but they didn't give him a lot of guaranteed money. Relatively speaking, it's a lot of money for any of us, but so I think that I think that the Steelers are wising up to that, and they also have Joe Hayden wants an extension as well, and they've got Minka next year. So to get those done, they have to get this done first, and I think they will.
Now the Steelers' offensive line, they kind of revamped it this offseason. A couple guys are gone. They brought in a couple guys, and the Eagles' defensive front has been excellent throughout camp, and we know how good the Eagles' offensive line is on paper. So what is Pittsburgh going to provide the Eagles on Thursday?
Well, the Steelers are going to get a shot. I don't know if he's going to play, but Javon Hargrave, the old grave digger. And that was a heartbreaker for the Steelers because a good player for the Steelers, a little bit of a late bloomer. And then they couldn't afford him and the Eagles went. And almost like a guy graduates, you applaud him and you move on. So, so I'm excited to see the grave digger, is that we used to call him that here. But yeah, the offensive line in Pittsburgh they've had a really bad week. And again, they looked good in the Hall of Fame game. They had one blow-up blocking assignment that led to Najee's negative run. But in general, I think one of the most disappointing guys has been Kevin Dotson, who was a rookie last year. He started with some injuries at left guard. There were some rumors he didn't come into camp in the best condition, and that's played itself out. So they're really disappointed with him. And they had Joe Haeg, the former Buccaneer, who they got this offseason. He actually started during the Hall of Fame game and looked okay. But one of the positive spins has been Kendrick Green, the third-round pick out of Illinois, who wears 53. So Eagle fans, Marquise Pouncey did not come out of retirement. Kendrick Green wears number 53 as well. And I think he will be the Steelers starting center week 1. He started the Hall of Fame game. I think he's going to start again on Thursday night. And the Steelers have really been raving about him. He'll be, I think, the face of the new wave of the Steelers offensive line. The big MO for the Steelers this whole time has been we have to be more physical in the offensive line. That might be able to overshadow maybe some lack of talent there that might not be there anymore. So, but if we're physical and we have an emphasis on running the ball, that might be what does ultimately end up helping us. But I think one of the linemen that has the biggest question mark on him is going to be Okorafor, who was I think he was drafted just about the time Mason was in the third round in 18. He's replacing Villanueva's left tackle. Villanueva started, I think, 93 straight games for the Steelers, the longest streak. So now you have a new left tackle. So a lot of questions there. There's been some injuries and obviously the disappointment with Dotson. But one other guy I wanted to mention, Dan Moore, another rookie who might get a chance to start too if things don't pan out for the Steelers. Their projected starting lineup on the line.
Now, one last Steeler question for you, Brian. Then I want to get a couple other divisional questions in as well. Ben didn't play last week. You're telling me he's not going to play this week. He may not play at any point during the preseason, but he's going to be their starting quarterback game 1. He had a mixed bag of tricks last year. Again, as you pointed out, Steelers like to point to one-loss record. And Ben had a really good one-loss record. It depends on where you take it to. You just say the last quarter of the season, all of a sudden, the one-loss record doesn't look so good. And a playoff loss on top of it. Watching him play down in and down out, he was effective, but he just didn't get the ball down the field the way that Ben Roethlisberger did. And there were explanations for that last year. Did you buy them? Have you seen improvement in practice? How is Ben throwing the football, and what should you expect week number 1 with the Steelers?
He looks really good now. He does look really good now. His arm strength is back. I mean, the Steelers defensive coordinator has been quoted to say, like, that's big. Big Ben's here. Like, we're not getting glimpses of Big Ben. Like, he's Big Ben the entire practice. When he does practice, like Watt, he's been getting some veteran days off. But when he's practiced, he's looked really good. And even Ben has said, last year in the offseason, once the arm got good enough to throw, then all of a sudden the rehab started. And he was throwing, he said, hundreds of balls a day. And then he said maybe that wore his arm out the last quarter of the season, and then that led to the 1-5 record their last 6. He said this offseason he had months where he didn't throw at all. He just let that baby totally heal, totally recover. He said this is his first normal offseason in 2 years. So now he thinks that strength in his arm is back. As you alluded to, his deep ball was not very good last year. Not very good at all. And if it wasn't for a few that he did hit against the Colts, they would have made it as a wild card team instead of division champions last year. They would have lost 5 in a row going into the playoffs. So it's back. The question is how long is that going to last? His accuracy is still there. He completed, I think, 65-66% of his throws last year. So the accuracy is still there. And he has done a good job learning Matt Canada's offense. I don't think it's going to be a lot different than last year. I think everybody's saying that it's going to be a total difference now that they've changed offensive coordinators. I think it's going to be more balanced. You're still going to see the jet sweeps, the shovel passes, the bubble screens, stuff that Brandy Finkner did last year. But I think you're going to see more of an emphasis on running, and you are going to see some more deep throws. And the Steelers receiving core is really good. I mean, they didn't draft a receiver for the first time in a long time because they frankly didn't have to. So the weapons are there. Najee Harris, I think, is going to break Franco and Le'Veon Bell's rookie running records for the Steelers. They have 2 different ones. But the question is on offensive line. How good is that offensive line going to be? And Pat Freiermuth, the Penn State tight end, you might see him Thursday. A shoulder injury kept him out of last week's game. So I think it's going to be a big season for Ben. We'll just have to wait and see if that arm holds up.
Now, the AFC's loaded, Brian. You know this. Kansas City, Tennessee, Buffalo. We can go on and on. Pittsburgh never seems to be mentioned that, even though they're always virtually pretty much a lock for the playoffs every year. Where do you see them fitting in this puzzle?
I see them finishing 3rd of the division and getting a wild card spot. I think with that, 7 playoff spots now, it's the opposite of baseball. Almost everybody's getting in now in football. Not quite, but a little less than 50% of the league. So I see the Steelers 10-7 and getting in as a 6 or 7 seed. And honestly, I know that might just think that their record or their schedule at the back end is really hard. They have an early bye, which I think is good. I just think that the Browns now we don't know. I mean, the Browns 2 years ago had all those expectations and they were awful. Last year they didn't have as many expectations and they made it to the second round. So, and Baker Mayfield, I still think is the weakest quarterback in that division. I think for what they're having him do within that system, he's doing a really good job. But I don't think he's not a Hall of Fame quarterback. He's a tier or 2 below. And he could hold them back potentially. Odell Beckham Jr. is back, which honestly wasn't a good thing for the Browns historically the last couple of years. Baker's better without him. So there's some questions there, but the running game is really strong. It's one of the best in the league, if not the best, the Browns. Offensive line is really good. The interior of that defense, there's some questions. But overall, that defense is good, maybe the 2nd or 3rd best in the division. But that might hold the Browns back a little bit. But I think it's between the Browns and the Ravens for who's going to win. If either of those teams struggle or there's injuries, the Steelers could sneak in and win it. Lamar Jackson's a phenomenal player. He's getting better every year. I think they're going to take more pressure off him. They're going to give the ball to J.K. Dobbins a little bit more this season, I would think. Again, the big question in Baltimore is the receiving core. Is it strong enough? Bateman, their first-round guy, had an injury yesterday. I don't think it's a serious injury, but still – we don't know how much they've put. They wanted Juju Smith-Schuster. They weren't able to get him. Similar to Philadelphia, there's questions there at receiver. I think Cincinnati's going to be a lot better. Ready to compete for that division, I'm not sure. But I think the Bengals are going to play a role in who does win the division based on how many of these matchups they can win with NFC or AFC North foes. Joe Burrow led the league in passing before he got hurt. And they've added more receivers to his disposal. They've added some help on offensive line. So I think the Bengals could be a 6-win outfit this year. And that's going to affect, obviously, what else happens in the AFC North.
Thanks for your stance on the AFC North, because it makes my question very much on point. The bottom line is the Steelers won the division last year, right? Regular season champions.
Right.
So can Mike Tomlin use the underdog role? Hey, did you hear what Jeff DeArdo said? He picked us for third place. Can he play the underdog card after a year that he won the division? All right, he got picked off in the playoffs by one of those divisional opponents, but he did win the division. Is he that kind of coach? Will he play the we're not getting enough respect card to get this team ready for the season?
I think that's more of that was definitely Bill Cowher's card. He played that whenever he could. I don't honestly know how much Tomlin does that. His whole thing is the standard is the standard. So I think some of the Steelers leaders will. Ben will. Cameron Hayward will. Some of those, there's not many left now. Those are probably some of the only veterans I can think of, honestly. They had so many guys leave, Pouncey, Vince Williams, all those guys. But I think that Cam Hayward thrives off of that. TJ Watt does. So I think the Steelers leaders will say, hey, no one thinks we can do this anymore. So let's go out and shock the world. But I think for Mike Tomlin, it's going to be, hey, the standard is still the standard. And I think that that is going to be the MO. And I think, honestly, guys, and I know you guys know this with the Eagles 4 years ago, all you have to do is make the tournament, right? With the NFL now, with the way the salary caps are, the margin between the first-seeded team and the seventh-seeded team now is so razor thin. It might just be the play and quarterback is different. Mahomes just might get you that number 1 or number 2 seed. So, I think for Steeler fans or Eagle fans or whoever fans you are of, just make the playoffs. And you don't know what's going to happen. We've seen wild cards win. We've seen teams with backup quarterbacks win. If your defense gets hot or your quarterback gets hot, you never know. So I think that would be my focus for any fan of any team. Just get one of those number 7 playoff spots and then roll the dice and see where you end up. So I think for, again, if you're a Steeler fan, I think that needs to be your focus. Just try to make the playoffs. Don't care how, and we'll see what happens once we get there. Outsider's
opinion, what are your thoughts on Jalen Hurts?
I really like Jalen Hurts. I thought he played really well in the limited time he got in that controversial Week 17 game. I don't know why he didn't finish that game, but I don't want to open up old wounds. But I think he's got a great head on his shoulders. I think he said all the right things as a rookie. He obviously made it clear that he wanted to play without ruffling feathers, no pun intended, with the Eagles. So I love his accuracy. I love his athleticism. He reminds me of Kyler Murray a lot, but I think maybe less mobility, but a better arm. And I think that he's a football lover. That's what Mike Tomlin used yesterday to describe Melvin Ingram. I think to be a really good quarterback, you have to be a football lover. Like Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, Kyler Murray, Lamar Jackson. These guys get into the playbook. I think there's one quarterback, I can't remember which one, but he has these teams have tracking devices, so they know, or on their computers, so they know how much these guys are watching film. I can't remember what team it was, but a rookie quarterback led the team in film watching this year. It's one of the top guys that got drafted, but I'm remiss to remember.
I know that was Herbert.
That was Herbert, I think. I think that was Herbert. Right. So again, I think that your guy is a football lover, and I think that not only is that going to help him learn the nuances of a playbook and learning how to play well against NFL defenses, that's going to inspire his teammates. If our guy is in the room doing this, why am I not doing this? And I think that I don't think this generation gets enough credit for how much they love football and how much work they're willing to put in. And I think that he is a guy that's doing a lot behind the scenes. Not a big self-promoter, not doing a lot on social media, which I also like. He's kind of old school. But I love him, and I think that the Eagles are in a good place with him at quarterback for sure.
And we can tell this guy loves football as well. Bryan, great stuff. Thanks for coming on. We appreciate the neutral hat for not showing your AFC North colors. Thanks for a couple of minutes of insight here with us. We'll get you on again down the road.
I would love to, guys. Thanks for having me on. Have a great rest of your day.
Our pleasure. That is Bryan DeArdo.